In the dead of an Oregon winter, a homeless veteran named Ethan Walker stumbled through a blizzard with his loyal shepherd, Rex. He had lost his home, his wife, and his purpose until he found an old abandoned van buried in snow. Inside was a note that read, "Don't give up, it still runs." That single message sparked a miracle. What began as one man's struggle to survive became a journey that brought warmth, faith, and second chances to an entire town. Stay with us until the end, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of hope, redemption, and the quiet miracles God still writes every day. The wind cut through the night like shards of glass, howling across the empty plains of Oregon. Snow whirled in thick, relentless waves, erasing roads, fences, and memories alike. Beneath that white fury, a man trudged forward, his boots sinking deep into the frozen mud, his breath forming brief ghosts that vanished in the dark. Ethan Walker was 45, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of man built more for storms than for comfort. His hair, once chestnut, was now streaked with gray, hanging messily over a face carved by wind and time. A beard darkened his jaw, unkempt but strong, framing lips often silent, and eyes the color of faded denim eyes that had seen too much sand, fire, and loss. Once, those eyes had belonged to a Navy combat engineer in Afghanistan. Now, they belonged to a man no one remembered. Beside him trotted Rex, a 12-year-old German shepherd with a mottled gray muzzle and sharp amber eyes that still burned with loyalty. His paws bled slightly from ice, but he pressed on, head lowered, tail flicking against Ethan's leg as if to say, "We're still here, partner." Rex had served as a K-9 during Ethan's last deployment, trained to detect explosives, fearless in the roar of chaos until the day an explosion had left his hind leg with a faint limp and Ethan's heart with a wound that never healed. They had both been retired afterward. Heroes, the officer had said. Heroes don't sleep under bridges, Ethan thought bitterly. Tonight, hunger pressed against his ribs like another cold wind. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. The small tin flask in his pocket held only melted snow, and even that was running low. Rex whined softly, sensing Ethan's weakness. "Just a bit further, boy," he muttered, his voice rough, the kind that used to command platoons but now barely carried across the snow. "We'll find something. We always do." They stumbled into what looked like a scrapyard, half buried beneath drifts of snow, a graveyard of rusted metal and forgotten machines. The sign above the gate had fallen sideways, the word "Auto" barely visible beneath ice. Ethan pushed it open, the hinges screaming like something alive. The smell of frozen oil and wet iron filled his lungs. He used to fix engines back in the service. Now the sight of dismantled cars almost felt like coming home. He scanned the Rex, searching for anything that could serve as shelter. Rex sniffed the ground, nose twitching under a blanket of frost. Then, in the corner, half hidden under a collapsed tarp, Ethan saw it an old white van, the kind used by plumbers or delivery men decades ago. One side was dented, the windshield cracked into a spiderweb, and rust ate through the edges like disease. Still, it was a box against the wind, and that was enough. He forced the door open, the hinges groaning. Inside smelled of dust and gasoline. A pile of old tools lay scattered: pliers, a wrench, a rusted screwdriver, and on the dashboard, under a thin layer of frost, a note written in smudged ink, "Don't give up, it still runs." Ethan stared at the words for a long moment. The handwriting was shaky, but the message felt alive, as if the van itself whispered through it. He sat behind the wheel, feeling the cracked leather under his gloves. For the first time in months, something in him stirred, not quite hope, but its echo. He opened the hood. The engine was old, wires frayed, oil thick as tar. Any sane man would have walked away. But Ethan had lived through worse. He gathered the scattered tools, knelt in the snow, and began to work. His fingers numbed quickly, but the rhythm, loosen, tighten, wipe, breathe, was familiar. It brought back memories of nights under desert stars, fixing broken Humvees while mortar fire echoed in the distance. Back then, men had depended on him to make engines breathe again. Now, only one soul did. He glanced at Rex, lying by the door, eyes half closed but watching. "You think I've lost it, huh?" Ethan whispered. Rex wagged his tail weakly. Hours passed. The blizzard screamed outside, but inside the van, there was only the clink of tools, the rasp of his breath, and the occasional curse when a bolt refused to turn. Each stubborn screw felt like another piece of his life resisting him. Each time the wrench slipped, he saw his wife's face in the hospital bed pale, smiling despite the pain. "You always fix things, Ethan," she had said, "even when you can't fix yourself." By midnight, his hands were raw and trembling. He leaned back, exhaustion heavy in his bones. He stared at the dead engine, then at the note again. The words blurred from cold and fatigue. "All right," he muttered. "One last try." He turned the key. The starter coughed once, twice, then fell silent. He tried again. A spark, a sputter, then a deep, uneven rumble that grew into a steady heartbeat of metal. Ethan froze. The van was alive. Rex lifted his head, ears perked, tail thumping softly. For a moment, both man and dog simply listened to the sound, the hum of something refusing to die. Ethan's eyes burned, but it wasn't from the wind. He exhaled slowly, a faint, trembling smile crossing his chapped lips. He shut the door, the warmth of the running engine spreading faintly through the metal walls. Rex crawled closer, resting his head on Ethan's boot. "Guess we found our home, buddy," Ethan whispered. The engine's hum answered like an old friend. Outside, the storm howled across the Oregon night. But inside that rusted van, under the flickering glow of a single oil lamp, a soldier and his dog sat together, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like beginning. Morning broke pale and fragile over the scrapyard, a thin light bleeding through the clouds like hope through grief. The storm had quieted, leaving the world muffled beneath a blanket of snow. Inside the van, Ethan stirred from a restless sleep. His back ached from the cold floor, and the scent of oil still lingered on his hands. Beside him, Rex raised his head, amber eyes half-lidded but alert, his breath forming little clouds in the chill air. Ethan rubbed his face, feeling the rough stubble scrape against his gloves. "We made it through the night, partner," he muttered. The van's engine sat silent now, but its presence felt alive, a heart that had beaten when his own nearly failed. He reached into the glove compartment, hoping for a miracle food, maybe, or something left behind. What he found instead was a small burlap pouch tucked behind a cracked manual. The moment he opened it, the scent hit him coffee beans, faint but unmistakable, dry yet still carrying that earthy, bitter sweetness. For a long moment, Ethan just stared. Coffee had been his wife's ritual, Grace Walker, a woman of quiet laughter and soft brown hair, always tied messily at the back, her hands forever smelling of roasted beans and cinnamon. She had worked part-time at a small cafe before the illness came. He could almost hear her voice. Even in the darkest morning, a cup of coffee can remind you that warmth still exists somewhere. His throat tightened. He blinked the memory away, setting the pouch on the dashboard as if it were sacred. Digging through the drawers beneath the seats, he found a dented metal mug, a half-empty water canister, and an old camp stove that looked like it hadn't burned in years. He cleaned them, his movements mechanical, soldier-like. Soon, a thin trail of smoke rose inside the van. The smell of boiling water mingled with coffee grounds, crude but comforting. Rex's ears perked up, nose twitching. Ethan smiled faintly. "Don't look at me like that, you don't even drink this stuff." The dog gave a low whine, pressing his muzzle into Ethan's side. The first sip was weak, more memory than flavor, but it filled the van with something neither of them had felt, in months' warmth that came from within. "We could sell this," Ethan whispered, almost afraid of his own voice. "People still need coffee. Even now." He turned the idea over in his mind like a stone smoothing underwater. The van could move. It could shelter. Maybe it could also give. By midday, Ethan had cleared out the back, wiping down the dusty shelves and arranging his few tools neatly along the wall. He hung a piece of cardboard near the window and scrawled the words, "Hot coffee, pay what you can," in thick black marker. The letters looked shaky, but they were honest. He parked near the edge of an old industrial road where snowplows had begun clearing paths and truckers rumbled by. The first person to stop was Martha Green, a woman in her 60s with silver hair tucked beneath a knitted cap. Her face was kind but lined by years of work, perhaps at a factory, perhaps at life itself. She approached cautiously, holding a plastic bag of groceries. "You really selling coffee out of this thing?" she asked, her voice carrying a faint Oregon drawl. Ethan smiled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Trying to. Haven't scared anyone off yet." She chuckled, the sound like cracked ice, giving way to water. "Well, soldier, pour me one. Looks warmer than my apartment heater." Ethan poured the steaming liquid into a paper cup he'd found in the glove box. She sniffed it, smiled, and dropped 2 crumpled bills into the tin can on his dashboard. "Keep the change," she said. "Looks like you could use it." Then she reached down to pet Rex, who leaned into her hand, tail wagging softly. "Good boy," she murmured. "He's the real salesman here." Word spread faster than he expected. By late afternoon, a pair of construction workers stopped for coffee, their faces red from cold, hands calloused and cracked. One of them, Tommy, a young man with blonde stubble and an easy grin, joked, "Didn't think a coffee this good came from a rust bucket." Ethan laughed for the first time in weeks. "The van's tougher than it looks." Tommy winked. "Guess that makes 2 of you." As the sun began to fade behind the warehouses, Ethan leaned against the van, watching his breath mix with the smoke from the small camp stove. Rex sat beside him, head resting on his knee. The day had earned him less than $20, but it felt like a fortune. He had spoken to people, laughed even. For a few hours, he hadn't been invisible. He glanced at the sign again, "Pay what you can." The words reminded him of Grace's kindness, her belief that no one should be turned away from warmth. Maybe this was how he could honor her, not through grief, but through giving. He reached down, scratching behind Rex's ears. "Looks like we're in business, buddy," he said softly. The shepherd gave a single bark, as if agreeing. Night fell again, but the van glowed faintly from within, the warm scent of coffee lingering in the air. For the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't dread tomorrow. He had a purpose now, one small, steaming cup at a time. The third morning came with a dim sun stretching weak fingers through the low Oregon fog. The world smelled of wet asphalt and roasted beans, the quiet hum of trucks echoing across the half-empty road. Ethan stood beside his van, his breath misting in the cold air as he stirred the pot of coffee. The sign taped to the door, "Hot coffee, pay what you can," fluttered faintly in the wind. Beside him, Rex sat upright like a soldier at ease, his ears twitching to every sound, his fur dusted with thin snowflakes. Business had been steady. Drivers stopped for warmth, strangers left coins and small bills in the tin cup, and sometimes a sandwich or two. Ethan no longer kept count. Every time someone smiled at him before driving away, that was enough. The world, it seemed, wasn't done with kindness yet. That morning, a bright red car pulled over. The door opened, and out stepped Lily Carter, a young woman in her late 20s with chestnut hair that shimmered under the pale light. She wore a gray beanie pulled low, a denim jacket over a hoodie, and carried a camera hanging from a strap around her neck. Her face was pale from the cold, but her hazel eyes burned with alert curiosity, the kind that noticed small things others ignored. Lily had made a name for herself online by filming stories about unsung heroes, janitors, nurses, bus drivers, the quiet backbone of America. Behind her calm demeanor hid someone who had once known loss. Her father, a journalist, had died on assignment years ago, teaching her that truth was not always loud but often lived in silence. She approached the van, her boots crunching on snow. "Is this the famous coffee van I've been hearing rumors about?" she teased lightly, aiming her camera at the steaming pot. Ethan looked up, startled. He wasn't used to people calling anything he owned famous. "It's just coffee," he said with a shrug. "But it's warm." Lily smiled, watching him pour into a paper cup. His hands were large, calloused, steady hands that had fixed engines, carried rifles, and now, somehow, poured compassion. Rex sniffed her cautiously, tail wagging. "And who's this gentleman?" she asked. "Rex," Ethan replied. "He's the reason this place feels safe." The dog leaned forward, nose brushing her glove, then gave a single approving bark. Lily laughed, a sound crisp as glass breaking. Before she could pay, another figure appeared, a man in his 50s, shivering beneath a torn winter coat. His beard was overgrown, his shoes soaked through. His name, Ethan would later learn, was Walter Briggs, a laid-off truck driver who had been sleeping near the rail yard. Walter's voice trembled. "You got anything left, son? I ain't got cash, but I can scrub your tires if you need." Ethan handed him a cup instantly. "No work needed," he said simply. "Drink while it's hot." Lily's camera kept rolling, unnoticed. She zoomed in on the moment Walter's hands, rough, shaking, wrapped around the cup. Steam rose between them like a fragile bridge. Ethan smiled faintly. "You'll be all right," he murmured. Walter nodded, too choked up to reply. Later, when the man had gone, Lily lowered the camera. "You do this often?" she asked softly. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. "It's nothing heroic, just coffee." Lily looked at him, her voice almost a whisper. "No, it's hope. You're giving people a reason to keep walking." That evening, back in her small apartment filled with camera gear and half-drunk tea, Lily edited the footage. The frame showed the gray winter, the battered van, the quiet soldier pouring coffee, and the old dog waiting faithfully beside him. She titled the video, "The Soldier Who Serves Warmth Instead of War." She uploaded it at midnight, not expecting much, just another story in her long list of forgotten kindnesses. But by dawn, her phone was vibrating nonstop. The video had reached 50,000 views. By noon, 500,000. By nightfall, news outlets were calling. The comments section filled with messages. "My dad was a vet too. I cried watching this. He reminds me that good still exists." When Ethan woke the next morning, he found a small crowd waiting. People from town, travelers, even a man in a business suit, all holding their phones, smiling. "You're the coffee soldier," one of them said. Ethan blinked, bewildered. "The what?" Then he noticed Lily standing near the curb, camera slung around her neck, grinning. "Told you the world would notice," she said. The donations came next, envelopes left under the windshield wiper, bags of beans dropped off at night, gas money, messages taped to the door. Ethan tried to refuse at first, but Lily persuaded him. "It's not charity," she said. "It's investment in kindness." That afternoon, as snow began to fall again, Ethan brewed a larger pot. Rex barked every time a new person arrived. Walter returned too, carrying a loaf of bread he'd received from a church kitchen. He offered it to Ethan. "You helped me when I had nothing. Least I can do." Ethan accepted, his eyes softening. "Then let's share it." As dusk painted the road in copper light, Lily filmed one last scene. Ethan, handing out cups to strangers, laughter spilling into the cold air. Rex wagging his tail as if he understood every word. The coffee van glowed against the winter, its windows fogged, its aroma wrapping the street like a promise. That night, as Ethan locked up, he looked at the note still taped above the wheel. "Don't give up. It still runs." He thought of Grace, of the faces he'd met, and of how something broken could still carry warmth. He glanced at Lily, who was packing up her camera. "So," he said quietly, "what happens when the story's told?" She smiled. "Then we tell another one." Ethan nodded, hand resting on Rex's head. "All right, then," he whispered. "Let's keep the story running." The van's engine rumbled to life once more, echoing through the cold night, not just metal turning over, but hope rekindled. The following weeks unfolded like a dream Ethan was afraid to wake from. Each dawn found him parked at a new corner of the city, outside shelters, under bridges, near old train yards, where the forgotten drifted like ghosts. The coffee van had become a small moving miracle, humming through the snow with Rex perched proudly in the passenger seat, his red scarf fluttering as a silent flag of kindness. Every time the van stopped, a line would form. Not long lines, just the kind that told you the world still believed in small good things. Ethan had changed too. He still wore his old green parka, the same one patched at the elbows, but there was light behind his eyes again, a quiet fire that hadn't burned since his military days. When people greeted him now, he met their gaze without flinching. He was still a soldier, just fighting a gentler war. It began one frosty morning when two vans pulled up beside him at the old bus terminal. Out stepped Sergeant Frank Miller, a burly man. In his early 50s, with cropped gray hair, a thick beard, and a prosthetic left arm polished like steel. Frank's uniform jacket was worn but clean, the insignia faded, yet proudly displayed. He had seen Ethan's story on the news and tracked him down through a veteran support group. His eyes, deep blue and steady, carried both respect and sadness, the kind shared between men who'd lost the same battles. "You're Walker, right?" Frank said, extending his mechanical hand. "Afghanistan? 09? Ethan nodded, gripping it firmly. "You too?" Frank chuckled, the sound rough like gravel. "Different base, same hell. You're doing good work out here, brother. Thought you could use a hand." Behind him, a group of volunteers climbed out, mostly veterans, in layers of old military coats and wool hats. They were younger than Ethan, but carried that same haunted look. One of them, a tall, lanky kid named Luis Rivera, couldn't have been older than 24. His hair was black and unruly, his smile shy but genuine. "I can brew, sir," he said awkwardly, holding up a box of coffee filters. "Used to work at a diner before. Well, before everything." Ethan clapped him on the shoulder. "Then your hired payment comes in caffeine and stories." Luis grinned, the first honest smile Ethan had seen all week. Word spread fast. Within days, the coffee van had company a small convoy of borrowed vehicles and volunteers dubbed the Kind Patrol by locals. They delivered blankets, thermoses, and hope. Rex became the unofficial mascot, posing for photos, his gray muzzle and intelligent eyes appearing on countless social media posts, captioned, "Find the coffee van. Find warmth." Still, not everyone came with pure intentions. One afternoon, a sleek black SUV parked nearby. Out stepped Marion Holt, a woman in her 40s, tall and elegant in a long camel coat. Her dark hair was twisted into a perfect bun, her heels clicking sharply against the ice. Marion was the regional marketing director of a large coffee franchise, Roast Republic. She approached Ethan with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her gray eyes. "Mr. Walker," she began, her tone syrup smooth. "Your story has moved millions. Our company would like to sponsor you, provide supplies, funding, and maybe brand partnership." She handed him a folder thick with contracts. "We could repaint the van, call it Operation Warm Brew, a national campaign. You'd never have to worry about money again." Ethan studied the papers, then looked at the gleaming SUV behind her, the logo shining like chrome arrogance. He thought of the people who came to his van, hands trembling around paper cups, grateful for a few minutes of warmth. He thought of Grace, his wife, who had believed that goodness should stay humble. He closed the folder and handed it back. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "thank you, but this van runs on. Something you can't sell." Marion blinked, caught off guard. "Which is?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Heart." Marion's polite mask cracked for just a moment, annoyance flashing in her eyes. She turned sharply, muttering something about missed opportunities, and drove off, tires spitting slush. Luis whistled low. You just turned down a fortune, boss. Ethan shrugged, pouring him another cup. Can't buy what's already free. That night, the volunteers built a small fire outside the van. Snow drifted lazily from the sky, each flake catching the amber glow. Frank passed around mugs of hot coffee while Luis played an old harmonica, the tune soft and broken. Rex lay near the flames, his head on his paws, watching the group with sleepy pride. Ethan leaned back against the van, listening to laughter echo across the empty lot. He thought of how far they had come from that frozen scrapyard where he'd first found the van to this makeshift camp that now pulsed with life. He looked at the faded note still taped above the dashboard. Don't give up. It still runs. Somewhere deep inside, he realized the message had changed. It no longer spoke just of engines or machines. It spoke of people, of hearts that refused to rust. When dawn broke, the convoy rolled out again, engines humming, coffee steaming, laughter carrying over the snow. Ethan drove at the front, Rex's head sticking out the window, fur fluttering in the icy wind. The coffee van led the way, a battered vessel of hope gliding through the frostbitten city. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the cracked windshield, Ethan smiled to himself. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from the world anymore, he was driving straight into it. Spring crept into Oregon quietly, as if afraid to disturb the peace the coffee van had brought to the town. The snow had melted into thin ribbons along the roadside, leaving behind the smell of damp soil and renewal. Ethan stood outside a freshly painted garage on the edge of the river district. The sign above the door read, in neat black letters, "The Kind Garage, where machines and people heal." It was a modest building, one large door, a tin roof, and a window that looked out toward the sunrise, but to Ethan, it felt like a cathedral. The garage had been gifted by the town council after months of community support. The mayor himself had shaken Ethan's hand, though he was a man more accustomed to ribbon cuttings than dirt and oil. "You've done more for this city than most committees combined," he'd said. Ethan had simply nodded, uncomfortable under praise. He wasn't doing this for medals. He was doing it because, for the first time in years, he could. Inside, the garage smelled of new paint, steel, and freshly ground coffee. Luis Rivera, now sturdier, after months of work, was tuning up the espresso machine he'd rescued from a diner. His once boyish grin had settled into quiet confidence. "She's purring again, boss," he said, wiping grease from his hands. "Like an old soldier after a hot meal." Ethan chuckled. That's the kind of poetry they don't teach in school. Frank Miller was there, too, the older sergeant, sleeves rolled up, using his mechanical arm to hold a wrench steady while tightening bolts on the van's rear axle. The prosthetic gleamed under the morning light. "Feels good to fix something that ain't broken for once," he muttered. His tone carried the weight of a man who had spent decades trying to mend what couldn't be undone. Fallen friends, lost time, the silence that follows war. Rex, now slower with age but no less proud, wandered between their legs, tail swishing, nose twitching at every scent of oil and coffee. His muzzle had turned almost white, giving him the look of an old sage in fur. On his collar, the red scarf was frayed but clean, kept that way by Luis, who treated the dog like a guardian spirit. Whenever the van's engine roared, Rex would tilt his head as if listening for something sacred. That morning, Ethan found himself standing before the van's dashboard again. The old note, "Don't give up. It still runs," was still there, yellowed and curling at the edges. He smiled faintly and pulled out a pen, adding a line beneath it. "Now it runs on kindness." A familiar voice broke the silence. "You know that's going to end up in my film, right?" Ethan turned to see Lily Carter, camera in hand, leaning against the garage door. Her chestnut hair was longer now, her face bright but softer, the look of someone who had seen goodness and been changed by it. She had spent the last few months filming their work for a documentary she titled "The Van That Healed a Town." She stepped closer, adjusting the focus on her lens. "How does it feel," she asked, "to know You've become a symbol." Ethan smirked. "Symbols don't get their hands dirty, Lily. I still change my own oil." She laughed, that crisp sound that always broke through his seriousness. "Maybe that's why people trust you," she said. "You never stopped being one of them." Later that day, the garage filled with visitors. A young mother brought muffins as thanks for the coffee that had kept her warm during a night of homelessness. A mechanic from across town offered spare parts for free. Even Marion Holt, the corporate executive who once tried to buy Ethan's story, arrived this time without her SUV or entourage. She looked different, tired, but human. "I came to apologize," she said quietly. "You were right. Some things shouldn't be sold." Ethan simply nodded. "Grab a cup," he said, handing her a mug. "Coffee's still on the house." By afternoon, Lily filmed the crew as they loaded supplies into the van: blankets, thermoses, and care packages, with notes written by schoolchildren. Louise painted a small sun on the van's side, bright yellow against the white metal, its rays shaped like outstretched hands. "Looks like hope," Frank said, stepping back to admire it. Ethan glanced toward the window. "Then it's exactly what we need to keep driving." When the last light of day turned gold across the river, Ethan climbed into the driver's seat. Rex curled up beside him, eyes half closed, paws twitching in dreams. The volunteers stood by the garage doors, waving as the engine growled to life. Lily filmed quietly, her voice narrating behind the lens. "Sometimes a machine is just a machine. But sometimes, when driven by heart, it becomes something else, a reminder that the road home is not a place, but a purpose." Ethan drove slowly through the streets, past murals painted of him and Rex, past children waving from sidewalks, past the shelters that now smelled faintly of coffee and hope. The van's headlights carved through the mist like two small prayers. At the edge of town, he pulled over for a moment, watching the sunrise bloom across the horizon, soft pink, gentle gold, the color of healing. He placed a hand on the dashboard over the old note. "We did it, Grace," he whispered to the memory of his wife. "We found our way back." Rex gave a low bark, as if answering. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but for the first time, it didn't feel lonely. The coffee van rolled forward, smoke and sunlight swirling behind it, carrying warmth, faith, and the quiet proof that no winter lasts forever. At the end of it all, the coffee van was never just about coffee, or a man, or even a dog. It was about the quiet proof that miracles still walk among us, not in thunder or lightning, but in small, ordinary acts of love. Maybe God doesn't always part the seas or send angels in shining robes. Sometimes He simply places a cup of warmth in the hands of a stranger and whispers, "Keep going." In a world that can feel cold and endless, kindness is the closest thing we have to divine light, a reminder that heaven begins wherever compassion is poured. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and let's keep spreading faith in the goodness that still lives in people. May God bless you and keep you warm through every season of your life.